Hello everyone, what's going on? I'm Gav, the Master974, back again today, and welcome to another Valve source code tutorial after so long. And today I'm going to be outlining how you can add Radial Fog into your Source 2013 single player or multiplayer mods. Now I do need to give a thank you to the Smiling Man and Mega Fan who's over on my Discord server, which I'll leave in the description, you can join if you want to, for pointing this out to me as a suggestion. And also the biggest of thanks and shout outs to Waddles for providing the guide that I'm going to be using in this video, thank you very much. Now I'm going to start with Source 2013 multiplayer mods first, specifically ones that were made after the release of the Team Fortress 2 code, because what you'll find is that Radial Fog is already included. However, the Radial Fog will only work on maps that are deemed to be official. So how can you go about checking this out? Well, if you go to the file fogcontroller.cpp, which is in the server code, and go to the level init post entity function, then you'll see a comment left by Mistletoad that suggests that Radial Fog should be forcibly enabled for official maps. Now, if you go to the isOfficialMap function, it will always return false. So what's going on with this? Well, that's because this function is overridden by HL2MP game rules and TF2 game rules. So if you were to go to hl2mpgamerules.cpp, then the official maps are contained within this array that I'll show on screen right now. So basically Radial Fog will only be enabled if the name of the map that's currently loaded matches an entry in that array. Now in tf2gamerules.cpp it's a bit more complex because there's actually two arrays, one of Valve maps and a separate one for community maps, but the same underlying concept applies. If the map that is currently loaded has a map name that is in one of those arrays, then the map will have Radial Fog enabled, otherwise it won't. Now there's two ways to go about enabling Radial Fog for custom maps. Either you have to append the arrays with the map names that you have in your mod, or more simply, just remove the if statement as shown in the video. That way, Radial Fog will be always enabled for all maps. Now, part of the point I'm making with this is if there's any circumstances you guys can think of where you'd want to use linear fog instead of Radial Fog. For me, I think you'd always want to use Radial Fog, so how I'm going to proceed with this guide is going to make Radial Fog enabled at all times instead of the linear fog, but if you can come up with any examples then you can let me know in the comment section down below. Now for Source 2013 single player mods, the process is a bit more complicated because we're going to need to do some shader compilation, which is why this video is going to be a part of the shader authoring series. So let's get into what you need to do. So you want to go to your source code directory, open up the everything solution, and you want to go to the shaders project, whether it's shaders HL2 or shaders episodic, whatever the case is for your mod. And you want to go to the header files filter and open up common fxc.h. And you want to go to the very bottom of that file and just above the hashtag ndif, which is commented out saying hashtag ifndef of common fxch, you want to copy and paste the code that is going to be from the guide. It's just going to define two functions called calc radial fog fixed function and calc radial fog non-fixed function. Then you want to open up common psfxc.h. And you want to find the calc pixel fog factor function at around line 240, select all of it, copy paste that function with what you see in the guide. It's just overriding the function to do something a little bit different. Then you want to go to common vsfxc.h and inside of the calc fog function at around line 552, you want to find the return range fog line and replace that with return calc radial fog fixed function of world pos, cipos, cfog max density, cfog end over fog range, and then C capital O fog range. Then inside of the same file, you want to find a different calc fog function, but this time pertaining to water fog, and then find fl fog equals range fog of proj pos. Just replace that with fl fog equals calc radial fog fixed function of world pos, cipos, cfog max density, cfog end over fog range, and coo fog range. Now we're going to get into updating some of the shader source. So you want to go into the header files filter, right click add existing item and add light mapped generic ps23x.h. And then you want to open that file up, and in that file you'll see a line that says float fog factor equals calc pixel fog factor. at around the bottom of the file, and you want to replace the inputs, specifically g_ipos to .xyz at the end of it, and i.worldpos_projposz, add .xyz to the end of that, but leave all of the other stuff intact. Then you want to go to the shader source fxc filter of the project, right click, add existing item, and add lightmapped generic ps2x.fxc and lightmapped generic vs20.fxc. And in that same filter, you also want to add vertex lit and unlit generic bump ps2x and vs20.fxc, and also vertex lit and unlit generic ps2x and vs20.fxc. Then in vertex lit and unlit generic bump ps2x.fxc, you want to open that up at around line 330 with the float fog factor line. And similarly to what we did before, we just want to replace the g_ipos so it has .xyz at the end of it, and the i.worldpos_projposz to have .xyz at the end of it as well. And now just under that at around line 332, there's another float fog factor line, but this time we want to completely change that so it says float fog factor equals calc pixel fog factor of g_f pixel fog type, g_fog params, g_ipos.xyz, i.worldpos_projposz.xyz, i.worldpos_projposz.w. Now you want to open up vertex lit and unlit generic ps2x.fxc, and at around line 471 there's another float fog factor line, so you just want to replace the inputs, specifically g_ipos.xyz and i.worldpos_projposz.xyz, while leaving all of the other inputs intact. And just below that at around line 477 there's the float fog factor line. You want to change that so it says float fog factor equals calc pixel fog factor of g_f pixel fog type, g_fog params, g_ipos.xyz, i.worldpos_projposz.xyz, and then i.projpoz.z. Next, you want to again right click shader source fxc and add existing item and add sprite ps2x.fxc and sprite vs20.fxc. And then in sprite ps2x.fxc, you want to go to around line 47 where there is a float fog factor line. And again, just change the inputs. So the g_ipos spec exponent is .xyz at the end of it, and i.worldpos_projposz has .xyz at the end of it, but leaving all of the other inputs as they are already. And then again, go to the shader source fxc, right click add existing item and add cable ps2x.fxc and cable vs20.fxc, and then open up cable ps2x.fxc, and at around line 52 there is a float fog factor line, and again make sure the inputs are as they are, but g_ipos_spec exponent has .xyz at the end of it, and the i.worldpos_projposz has .xyz at the end of it. Now, one of the things we're going to need to do is update the water shader. That's going to be a little bit more complex because we actually need to modify the water.cpp file. And as an aside, if you try to modify the stock shaders, especially in Source 2013 single player mods, the engine really doesn't like you doing that, and you won't be able to launch into your mod if you override the stock shaders. So you need to define the shader as something different. So in that sense, what we're going to need to do is inside of the source code material system std shaders folder, you want to find and copy, paste and duplicate and rename water.cpp, water ps2x.fxc, water ps2x helper.h, water vs20.fxc, water cheap ps2x.fxc and water cheap vs20.fxc. So copy paste those in the same directory, but rename them so you just have radial fog underscore at the start of them. So you should have radial fog water ps2x, radial fog water ps2x helper, radial fog water vs20, radial fog water cheap ps2x, and radial fog water cheap vs20. Then if you go back to your Visual Studio Everything solution, you want to right click add existing items. Inside of source files, you want to add radial fog water.cpp. In the header files, add radial fog water ps2x helper.h, and in the shader source fxc filter, add the fxc files, radial fog water ps2x, radial fog water vs20, radial fog water cheap ps2x, and radial fog water cheap vs20. Now you want to open up radialfogwater.cpp, and inside of the file at the top with the hashtag include stuff, you'll see a bunch of .inc inclusions for water cheap and water. And you just pretty much want to add radial fog underscore at the start of all of them. So you'll have hashtag include of radial fog water cheap vs20.inc, and then ps20.inc and ps20b.inc, and then radial fog underscore water underscore vs20.inc, ps20.inc, and ps20b.inc. Now these will show up as errors because we need to compile the shader source files to actually create these .inc files, so just leave that for now. But then you want to find define fallback shader of water dx9 HDR at around line 24, and replace that so it says define fallback shader of radial fog underscore water, and then radial fog underscore water underscore dx9 underscore HDR. And then below that, inside of the begin vs shader of water dx90, just replace that with radial fog underscore water underscore dx90. And then at the very bottom of the file, you'll see a section that says begin inherited shader. And you just want to, again, replace that so it says radial fog underscore water underscore dx9 underscore HDR. And then radial fog underscore water underscore dx90. And then inside of the shader fallback section where it says return water dx90, just make it say return radial fog underscore water underscore dx90, but leave pretty much everything else as it is. Now in the same file, you want to go to around line 369, where there's a line that says p shader API arrow set pixel shader fog params of 8. And you want to add underneath that a float called VIPOS, which is an array of size 4. Then do p shader API arrow get world space camera position of VIPOS. Then VIPOS of element 3 equals 0.0f, and then p shader API arrow set pixel shader constant of 9, and then VIPOS as you'll see in the video. And then there's a separate section that says p shader API arrow set pixel shader constant of 1 cheap water params, which is at around line 501. And under that you want to add pretty much the exact same thing, a float VIPOS, which is an array of size 4, p shader API arrow get world space camera position of VIPOS, then VIPOS of element 3 equals 0.0f, and then p shader API arrow set pixel shader constant of 4 VIPOS. And now you want to do a pretty tedious step, but where every instance of water vs20 or ps20b or ps20 or water cheap vs20, ps20b or ps20, you just want to add radial fog underscore at the start of it. So I just choose to add radial fog underscore, select that, copy it, and then paste it in front of water vs20, ps20b and all that throughout the file. And this will be inside stuff like declare static vertex shader, set static vertex shader, declare dynamic vertex shader, and set dynamic pixel shader. Now, the thing is, this is going to show up with errors because this is stuff that's defined in the .inc files that we haven't made yet. So let's make some of the changes that is going to be useful in this case. So you want to go to radial fog water ps2x helper.h, and at around line 25, you'll see two variables called float f water fog start and float f water fog end minus start. That's a bit of a mouthful, I'm sorry. But just under it, you want to add a float 3 called VIPOS and another float 3 called VWorldPOS. And at the very bottom of the file, there is a hashtag if of pixel fog type, which is going to be defining fog factor stuff. You just want to replace all of that with fog factor equals calc pixel fog factor of pixel fog type i.pixel fog params i.vipos.xyz, i.vworldpos.xyz, and then i.vprojpos.z. Next, you want to go to radial fog water vs20.fxc, and at around line 30, you want to replace float w, which is text coord 3, with float 4 vworldpos underscore projpos w, which is text coord 3, as you'll see in the video. And then at around line 71, you want to replace o.w equals vproj projpos.w to o.vworldpos_projposw.w equals vprojpos.w, as you'll see in the video. There's some difference in capitals with the capital W and lowercase w, as you'll see in the video. Then just below that at around line 81, just underneath the hashtag endif for the hashtag if defined _Xbox 360 line, you just want to add o.vworldpos_projposw.xyz equals vworldpos. Then you want to go to Radial Fog Water ps2x.fxc, and at around line 44, and just underneath const float4 g pixel fog params, which is register C8, you want to add const float3 g_ipos, which is register C9, as you'll see in the video. And then at around line 56 with float w, which is text code 3, you want to replace that with float4 vworldpos_projposw, which is text code 3, as you'll see in the video. And then you want to find params.w equals i.w at around line 82. And you want to replace that with params.w equals i.vworldpos_projposw.w. And then you want to find params.fwaterfogend-start at around line 96. And just add under that params.vipos equals g_ipos. And params.vworldpos equals i.vworldpos_projposw.xyz. And then at around line 25, there's a hashtag include of water ps2x helper.h. You just want to replace that with hashtag include of radial fog _water _ps2x helper.h. And now you want to go to radial fog water cheap vs20.fxc, and underneath the float4 v extra bump text coord line, you want to add float3 vworldpos, which is text coord 7. And at around line 81, there's another hashtag endif corresponding to a hashtag if defined of _x360. So underneath that, you just want to add o.vworldpos equals worldpos. And then go to radial fog water cheap ps2x.fxc. And at around line 19, there is a const float4 called g pixel fog params. And underneath that, you just want to say const float3 g_ipos, which is register C4. And then you want to find a hashtag if multi-texture and a hashtag endif at around line 43. And just underneath that, add float3 vworldpos, which is text code 7. And at around line 147, there is a hashtag if of pixel fog type if statements, again defining float fog factor stuff. So you just wanted to delete all of that and replace it with float fog factor equals calc pixel fog factor of pixel fog type g_pixel fog params g_ipos.xyz, i.vworldpos.xyz, i.vrefract_w_proj_z.w. Now at this point we need to compile shaders, and I've tested using SL555's version of the shader compile tool with this, and unfortunately that does not work. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you choose to look at it, you need to use the Perl and DirectX SDK method, as I've done a video about and will probably card at this point, so you can check that out and be in a position to compile shaders. So you want to go to your src material system std shaders directory, find std shader dx920b.txt, and inside of that file you want to make sure that cable ps2x.fxc is added, as well as all of the other fxc files that we've added and or modified. So I'm not going to say all the underscores and .fxc stuff, but you want cable ps2x, cable vs20, then lightmap generic ps11, lightmap generic ps2x, then sprite ps2x, sprite vs20, radial fog water vs20, radial fog water ps2x, radial fog water cheap vs20, and radial fog water cheap ps2x. And then vertex lit and unlit generic bump ps2x and vs20, and vertex lit and unlit generic ps2x and vs20. Then you want to go to std shader dx930.txt and make sure you have vertex lit and unlit generic bump ps2x and vs20, and vertex lit and unlit generic ps2x and vs20. And then with all that being said and done, you can run build hl2 shaders or build episodic shaders, and it should begin to compile those shaders files. So with all that being said and done, that process will probably take about an hour, so put some Crydemore waves on in the background and enjoy. But with that being completed, you should have the .inc files. So if you go back to the Visual Studio Everything solution, the Radial Fog water.cpp file should now no longer have any errors because all of the .inc files should be present and compiled successfully. And also make sure that you build solution, that way you actually get a game shader dx9.dll file that includes all of the changes that we've made. And all you would need to do is load into a map that has an env fog controller entity in it already. So for example, I'm testing D1 Canals 02 or D2 Coast 1 or D2 Coast 2. And you also use the fog UI to override the fog parameters. That way the radial fog has an incredibly short distance, but that better illustrates the fact that this works. And you should find that radial fog is now present in your source mod. Except there is going to be one last little error that you're going to need to rectify, which is that because we've modified the water shader and actually called it radial fog underscore water now, you're going to need to replace every instance in a .vmt file for all of the water textures to use the new radial fog water shader. And so to that end, Waddles has already created a Google Drive link which will be left in the Valve Developer Wiki guide, which stubs all of the water textures to use the radial fog water shader. And now you can go back and test and see that yes, you get radial fog on water instead of the usual linear fog, and stuff like vertex lit generic shaders, cables and sprites also get affected correctly by radial fog. And I guess you could go about adding some of the radial fog stuff from the Source 2013 multiplayer code into the Source 2013 single player code if you want to make it so there's the choice between having radial fog or not. One thing I will say, it seems as if a lot of the radial fog code is included in Source 2013 single player mods, at least if you got the mod after the Team Fortress 2 update, because if you got the mod way before the Team Fortress 2 update, then there's not going to be any instances of radial fog existing in the code. So again, I'm not really going to be delving into that, but that is something you can do if you really want to. Okay everyone, I'm just going to have to make a little addendum to the video here because as I finished editing this, I realised I showcased footage of something that you might think is an error, but it's actually not, it's kind of intentional. But what I wanted to showcase was that there are certain materials and models in the game that aren't affected by fog, and the Combined Citadel is one of them, and that's purely in the .vmt file for that model. So if you look up the Combined Citadel open whatever .vmt through something like GCFscape, then you can see that there's a $no fog parameter in there set to 1, and that means it's unaffected by fog. So if you're thinking that it looks a bit weird, that you have a map where everything is surrounded by fog, but the Citadel is clearly visible, then that is purely an issue with the material for the model, not necessarily the radial fog stuff. So I just thought I'd point that out. In case you think that's a bit of an issue, that's all you'd really need to do is just go to the VMT file, remove that $no fog 1 command, and then models will begin to be affected by radial fog. So I thought I'd just add that at the end of the video here. Alright everyone, I've been here for around 25 minutes now, screwing up with the audio throughout as per usual, and I'm sorry it took so long to get this next tutorial out. I didn't plan on it being this, but it is what it is. Hope you found this helpful and somewhat enjoyable, or whatever the case might be. And if you're having issues with this, then let me just put it this way. If this video gets to 50 likes, I'll include all of the stuff that I've talked about in this video to my GitHub page, so that you don't have to go through any of this complicated shader compilation stuff on your own. And dislike the video if you don't like the idea of me asking for likes on a video. But anyway, let me know what you think about this, and hopefully you found this somewhat useful. And again, let me know if you think there's any instances where you think radial fog is not helpful or necessary and the linear fog would be better. So yeah, I better end the video now. Take care out there, peace out, see you later, have a great day. Hopefully you'll check out the next video, whatever it is, and hopefully it's not going to take me too long to make it. But yeah, thanks everyone, have a great day.